All right, final lecture here on Fight Club. I think we've worked through most of the major ideas and themes of the novel. The one piece we have yet to really discuss is what's going on with Marla Singer. And I want to make it clear that this is not a small or tangential or side concern of the novel. I actually think that Marla Singer is at the center of it. In fact, the narrator tells us as much in chapter 1. If you flip to page 14, this is right towards the end of chapter 1. The narrator says, "Up on top of the Parker Morris building with Tyler's gun in my mouth, while desks and filing cabinets and computers meteor down on the crowd around the building and smoke funnels up from the broken windows and 3 blocks down the street and demolition team watches the clock, I know all of this. The gun, the anarchy, the explosion is really about Marla Singer." So that should give us a huge pause, because up until this point, we've been talking about serious, weighty ideas as it relates to an oppressive system that dehumanizes our labor, or we talk about the Freudian ideas of civilization repressing our more primal instincts. And so the narrators claim that everything that's been going on, all of the destruction and violence, is really about Marla Singer, should really make you pause. It's a provocative statement, and my goal is to try to understand what's going on here. And the narrator gives us a good explanation right towards the end of the novel. If we go to chapter 28, page 198 for you, you'll see the narrator gives us another clear statement. I know why Tyler had occurred, he says. So again, this is providing an explanation for why Tyler exists. Notice before we have argued that Tyler is perhaps a response to the dehumanizing system of labor that we had discussed, and consumerism more specifically. We also argued that Tyler perhaps, as his split personality, is a reaction against the serious repression that occurs within civilization. But here the narrator is offering another theory. I know why Tyler had occurred. Tyler loved Marla. From the first night I met her, Tyler, or some part of me, had needed a way to be with Marla. So notice, this is, again, a kind of revision or a different theory of what's been going on. So we need to figure out how this relates to these key ideas of authenticity that we've been talking about, and why this relationship with Marla seems more important than many of the other issues that we've been discussing. And so in order to understand Marla's importance, then, I think we should look at the Marla-Tyler relationship, knowing what we know now, that Tyler is actually the narrator. And so we need to understand that the Marla-Tyler relationship was really the Marla-narrator relationship. And so let's understand what's going on there. And we see this in Chapter 8. If we go to Chapter 8, page 65... If you remember, this is when Tyler and Marla first become an item. And if you remember, the key idea here is that the Tyler-Marla relationship mirrors almost perfectly what was going on with the narrator's parents. And so let's take a look. Page 65, right towards the bottom, I believe. Except for their humping, Marla and Tyler are never in the same room. If Tyler's around, Marla ignores him. This is familiar ground. This is exactly how my parents were invisible to each other. Then my father went off to start another franchise. My father always said, get married before the sex gets boring, or you'll never get married. My mother said, never buy anything with a nylon zipper. My parents never said anything you'd want to embroider on a cushion. Tyler does 198 sit-ups, 199, 200. Tyler's wearing a sort of gummy flannel bathrobe and sweatpants. Get Marla out of the house, Tyler says. Send Marla to the store for a can of lye. The flake kind of lye, not the crystal kind. Just get rid of her. Me, I'm 6 years old again, and taking messages back and forth between my estranged parents. I hated this when I was 6. I hate it now. So we've looked at the scene before, but let's look at it through the lens of what we know now about the Tyler narrator twist. Obviously, this pains the narrator, having to deal with an estranged relationship with two individuals who seem negligent or separated from each other, who seem invisible from each other. What does this lack? This clearly lacks intimacy or love, right? Any sort of deeper companionship that people seem to crave. And instead, but now that we understand that Tyler is actually the narrator, we realize, whoa, the narrator is replicating the same sort of estranged relationship with Marla that his parents had with each other. And let's keep going with this knowledge through this new lens, seeing Tyler as actually the narrator. Tyler starts doing leg lifts, and I go downstairs to tell Marla, the flake kind of lie, and I give her a $10 bill and my bus pass. While Marla is still sitting at the kitchen table, I take the clove cigarette from between her fingers. Nice and easy. With a dishcloth, I wiped the rusty spots on Marla's arm, where the burn scabs cracked and started to bleed. Then I wedged each of her feet into a high-heel shoe. Marla looks down at me doing my Prince Charming routine with her shoes, and she says, I let myself in. I didn't think anyone was home. Your front door doesn't lock. I don't say anything. So notice the lack of any sort of response. He is not engaging in any sort of relationship with Marla when he is his narrator personality. You know, the condom is the glass slipper of our generation, says Marla. You slip it on, and when you meet a stranger, you dance all night, then you throw it away. The condom, I mean, not the stranger. So why does Marla say this? In my mind, I think she's clearly calling out the narrator. Hey, you seem to be using me just for sex, and then you throw me away. Pay more attention to me. Actually treat me like a human. And look at the narrator's response. I'm not talking to Marla. She can horn in on the support groups in Tyler, but there's no way she can be my friend. I've been waiting here all morning for you, she says. And notice there's no response. So once again, we're seeing that the narrator seems incapable of any sort of deeper intimacy or relationship with another person. And so what is the explanation for this? Notice he is unconsciously, and I think this is a key idea, it is unconscious. He doesn't even realize that he is the one who is sleeping with Marla. And so imagine this from Marla's perspective. She comes over, and at some points, the narrator, when he's donning the Tyler personality, seems interested in her. They sleep together, so on and so forth. And then at other moments, when he forgets about the Tyler personality, he is completely distant from her and seems to want nothing to do with her. And so the narrator here is unconsciously replicating the exact same distant and estranged relationship that his parents had, and that so clearly negatively affected him growing up. And so I think a couple of ways that we could interpret this is that the problems of authenticity that the narrator has been dealing with go a lot deeper than just a problem with the capitalist consumerist system he lives in, or a problem more abstractly with just civilization and its rules and limitations. This comes down to a deeper idea about the failure to healthily cope with his negative emotions. And so this brings us back, I think, if you remember the Romantics from last year, like Edgar Allan Poe or Nathaniel Hawthorne. One of their key ideas was that a failure to healthily cope with our negative emotions ultimately prevents us from being able to genuinely or authentically connect with others. And the dark romantics especially are all about the ways in which these negative emotions that we harbor can destroy relationships if they're not healthily dealt with. Also, hopefully, you should notice the parallel to the Freudian idea, not about civilization and its discontents, but about the unresolved issues from our childhood, and especially our relationship with our parents, end up unconsciously rearing their head later in life. And so I think ultimately, what point is this novel making here? It's making some claims about the way in which the real form of inauthenticity the narrator is struggling with is that of intimacy. He feels he cannot create any sort of intimate connections and thus authentic connections with others. And so he creates these lies and barriers between himself and the people who are trying to love him, which I think is the ultimate barrier to him actually feeling authentically fulfilled. Let's go to another chapter now, chapter 13, and we can see more of this at play. This is the scene where Marla calls on the narrator to come and check if she has any sort of lumps on her breast because she's afraid she has breast cancer. And notice again, the narrator, thinking that he is not Marla's romantic lover, ends up really misinterpreting a lot of these events within this chapter. So on page 102, you can see right at the beginning of the chapter, when I get to the Regent Hotel, Marla's in the lobby wearing a bathrobe. Marla called me at work and asked would I skip the gym and the library or the laundry or whatever I had planned after work and come see her instead. This is why Marla called, because she hates me. So notice right off the bat, he is misinterpreting why Marla is calling him. He interprets this as a sign that she hates him and is forcing him to do something that sucks, as opposed to realizing that it's a sign of intimacy, that he is one of the people that she can trust. She doesn't say a thing about her college and trust fund. If you remember a couple chapters before, they had accidentally spilled Marla's mother's fat all over the kitchen floor. What Marla says is, would I do her a favor? Marla was lying in the bed this afternoon. Marla lives on the meals that Meals on Wheels delivers for her neighbors who are dead. Marla accepts the meals and says they're asleep. Long story short, this afternoon Marla was just lying in bed, waiting for Meals on Wheels delivery between noon and 2. Marla hasn't had health insurance for a couple years, so she stopped looking. But this morning she looks and there seemed to be a lump, and the nodes under her arm near the lump were hard and tender at the same time. And she couldn't tell anyone she loves because she doesn't want to scare them, and she can't afford to see a doctor if this is nothing, but she needed to talk to someone, and someone else needed to look. So once again, same exact idea, right? That narrator interprets this as her needing to tell someone she doesn't love, or someone who doesn't love her, so she doesn't scare them away, as opposed to realizing that this is actually a deeper sign of intimacy. The color of Marla's brown eyes is like an animal that's been heated in a furnace and dropped into cold water. They call that vulcanized or galvanized or tempered. Marla says she'll forgive the collagen thing if I'll help her look. I figure she doesn't call Tyler because she doesn't want to scare him. I'm neutral in her book. I owe her. Again, right, same exact idea, misinterpreting this. And right towards the end of the chapter, we actually get some evidence that on a deeper level, on a more unconscious level, he has a desire for an intimate connection with Marla. He just can't fully admit it to himself. So this on page 106, same chapter. It says, Marla isn't laughing. I want to make her laugh, to warm her up, to make her forgive me for the collagen. I want to tell Marla there's nothing for me to find. If she found anything this morning, it was a mistake, a birthmark. Tyler has the scar from Tyler's, has the scar from Tyler's kiss on the back of her hand. So notice right here, right, the narrator seems to be admitting in this moment of vulnerability that he actually has a desire to make Marla feel good. And notice that is contrasted or juxtaposed with the scar on her hand that Tyler gave her. But notice, abstract this, right? Tyler is the narrator. So the narrator at moments is inflicting deep pain, both on a physical but also on an emotional level to Marla. Emotional in the sense that he is negligent towards her. He is estranged from her. He is silent towards her, cold and distant. And yet there's a deeper part of him that desires intimacy and connection. I want to make Marla laugh so I don't tell her about the last time I hugged Chloe. Chloe without hair, a skeleton dipped in yellow wax with a silk scarf tied around her bald head. If you remember, Chloe was one of the support group members who passed away. I hugged Chloe one last time before she disappeared forever. I told her she looked just like a pirate, and she laughed. Me, when I go to the beach, I always sit with my right foot tucked under me. Australia and New Zealand, or I keep it buried in the sand. My fear is that people will see my foot and I'll start to die in their minds. The cancer I don't have is everywhere now. I don't tell Marla that. So if you remember, this is a reference to a story the narrator tells or recounts during this chapter that he found a birthmark on his foot that the doctors at some point thought was a very aggressive form of cancer. And so for a minute, he thought that he had cancer. Now, what is this a symbol of? If we abstract it, this birthmark, this blemish, this sign that there is something wrong, I think could be a symbol of the blemishes or issues that one carries with them in their life. Right? And notice this next line. There are a lot of things we don't want to know about the people we love. It seems that the narrator is so afraid of making himself vulnerable and letting people see these defects or these blemishes in his character, right? The darker aspects of his self, that he ends up hiding them from everybody and thus erecting walls and barriers between himself and others. As opposed to healthily coping with his negative emotions, he's instead erecting barriers that push people away and prevent him from actually feeling a deeper or more authentic connection with others. And we can see all of this. I mean, Marla ends up becoming a much more important character towards the end of the novel, for sure, as the narrator begins to make the connections that he is Tyler Durden and that Marla was the key to figuring that out. So if we go to page 151, we can see the moment in which Marla, he starts to discuss this with Marla. And so 159, chapter 21. We can see here, I called Marla from my Seattle motel to ask if we've ever done it. You know, long distance, Marla says, what? Notice the idea of distance. There seems to be a separation between them. Slept together. What? Have I ever, had sex with her? Christ. Well, she says, have we ever had sex? You're such a piece of shit, says Marla. Have we had sex? I could kill you. Is that a yes or a no? I knew this would happen, Marla says. You're such a flake. You love me, you ignore me. You save my life, then you cook my mother into soap. I pinch myself. So notice here, now we are getting good evidence that the Tyler personality of the narrator, instead of solving the deeper problems that have been within the narrator's life, have actually erected a barrier. It is just another defense mechanism to the sense of emotionlessness, or I guess the emotional barriers that the narrator erects between him and others. That the real form of inauthenticity the narrator has been unable to confront is that of being afraid of intimate relationships and intimate connections, which is perhaps the reason why he feels so alienated and repressed and lonely and dead at the beginning of the novel. Let's go now to chapter 27. And so we're right up here at the end. And in this final conversation with Marla at the Denny's, right, he ends up warning her, watch out, Tyler might try to get you. He might order Project Mayhem people to try to hurt you. And this is on page 197. And Marla says, why should I believe any of this? It happens that fast. I say, because I think I like you. Marla says, not love. This is a cheesy enough moment. I say, don't push it. Everybody watching smiles. I have to go. I have to get out of here, I say. Watch out for guys with shaved heads or guys who look beat up. Black eyes, missing teeth, that sort of thing. And Marla says, so where are you going? I have to take care of Tyler Durden. So this is a big moment, right? This is, I think, the first moment where the narrator is being emotionally honest with himself and with Marla Singer. That he is finally able to acknowledge the fact that he does desire some sort of deeper, intimate connection with somebody else, and that the obstacle to this are the negative emotions, which could perhaps be embodied in Tyler Durden. That Tyler Durden is an obstacle to him being authentically intimate with others. And now if we go to chapter 29... flip over a couple of pages and go to page 204 and 205, you can see right at the end here is the narrator standing on the roof. Marla and everybody from the support groups come. So on page 204 it says, wait, or I guess Marla says, wait. And it's Marla coming toward us across the roof. Marla's coming toward me, just me, because Tyler's gone. Now notice what was going on in this scene. Tyler was pointing the gun at the narrator. This is the return back to that first chapter. But if you view it through the eyes of any other person, it would just look like the narrator standing there pointing a gun at himself. Obviously, a much darker interpretation than Tyler pointing the gun at him. Evidence, right, of the deeper suicidal, self-destructive tendencies that the narrator has embodied throughout the entire novel. But let's see what happens when Marla comes. Marla's coming toward me, just me, because Tyler's gone. Poof. Tyler's my hallucination, not hers. Fast as a magic trick, Tyler's disappeared. And now I'm just one man holding a gun in my mouth. We followed you, Marla yells. All the people from the support group. You don't have to do this. Put the gun down. Now, if you watch the movie, you'll see that this is a very different ending than what happens in the movie. In the movie, the narrator ends up doing the same thing with the gun that we'll see in just a moment. But then all of the buildings explode, and Marla ends up being brought in by some of the Project Mayhem guys after that entire scene had occurred. And then the narrator says, I'm better now. You met me at a strange time in my life. As music starts playing, and then he holds her hand. Evidence that he's ready now for a relationship. But here we have the support group people coming. Good evidence in a different way of healthy relationships or intimate connections being an important part of the narrator's development towards a more authentic being. Let's keep going. Behind Marla, all the bowel cancers, the brain parasites, the melanoma people, the tuberculosis people are walking, limping, wheelchairing toward me. They're saying, wait. Their voices come to me on the cold wind saying, stop. And we can help you. Let us help you. Across the sky comes the whop, whop, whop of police helicopters. I yell, go, get out of here. This building is going to explode. Marla yells, we know. This is like a total epiphany moment for me. I'm not killing myself, I yell. I'm killing Tyler. I'm Joe's hard drive. I remember everything. It's not love or anything, Marla shouts, but I think I like you too. 1 minute. Marla likes Tyler. No, I like you, Marla shouts. I know the difference. And nothing explodes. The barrel of the gun tucked in my surviving cheek, I say, Tyler, you mixed the nitro with paraffin, didn't you? Paraffin never works. I have to do this. The police helicopters. And I pull the trigger. So there are a couple different ways to interpret this final scene, and I think the book is actually much more ambiguous than the film. I highly recommend watching the film if you haven't seen it. There are some good differences, and in some ways I actually like the film better. Specifically on this question of Marla, I think it ends on a less ambiguous note and has clear evidence that the narrator at the end of the movie has actually developed in a certain way and is ready for love and intimate relationships, and thus has made a step towards a more authentic form of being. That the big obstacle, he let all of these other delusions of grandeur, these delusions of overthrowing civilization and the consumerist capitalist system, as being a distraction from the deeper, more emotional and more intimate obstacles that were in his way. I think this ending, though, is much more ambiguous, and let's talk about why. I think there are two ways to interpret this pulling the trigger at the end. The first interpretation would be, yes, he actually is getting rid of Tyler here, and this is not a self-destructive moment, but instead it is a sign of him being able to finally overcome the Tyler Durden personality and thus open himself to a more authentic and intimate relationship with Marla. The second and much darker interpretation is that this is just furthering his delusions and excuses due to his inability to embrace intimate connections with others, right? This is him continuing the self-destructive impulses and trying to create yet another barrier between himself and Marla. Marla says, "You don't have to do this. I like you. You can put the gun down." And what does the narrator do? He shoots himself in the face. So I think there's a reading based on the ambiguity here that this is a very dark moment, that this is not the narrator embracing the intimate love into his life, but instead acknowledging that self-destruction is his only way out of this situation. And that brings us to the two different endings. Again, the novel's ending seems to be pessimistic. At first, it seems a little bit better, right? He seems to end on in chapter 30 on this kind of Zen realization that he is now in a better place. He is in heaven. He's in his father's house. What has he lacked his whole life? Some sort of deeper father figure. But obviously, we quickly find out that these are more delusions. That he is in some sort of facility, some sort of asylum or psychiatric ward, so on and so forth, and that they are taking care of him. And he does kind of have this Zen moment, right? I look at God behind his desk, that's the therapist or psychiatrist, taking notes on a pad, but God's got this all wrong. We are not special. We're not crap or trash either. We just are. So this is a very Buddhist Zen ending place for the narrator in this novel. It's not really affirming humanity, but not really negating humanity, just being at peace with what humanity is. And so, this ending seems to have a sort of ominous tone to it, especially at the end when the workers start saying, "We miss you, Mr. Durden. Everything's going according to plan. We're going to break up civilization so we can make something better of the world. We look forward to getting you back." And so has the narrator really developed here? Will he get out and have a more intimate and open and healthy relationship with Marla? Is he finally able to tear down those barriers that he has erected throughout his life that have prevented him from healthily coping with negative emotions and thus genuinely and authentically connecting with others? Which I think the novel is positing as a deeper and more genuine form of authenticity, actual intimate connections with others, as opposed to, trying to destroy civilizations, which is the Tyler Durden place. Is this just evidence that he will get out and continue these delusions and continue the destruction as the only way for him to kind of get out? It is unclear, and I think it is left ambiguous. Film's ending, I think, as I've already mentioned, strongly implies the narrator has matured and is ready to affirm something in life. I think despite all of the destruction, I think the buildings destroying all around him and Marla is good evidence that yes, he did have to destroy something in order to detach from more inauthentic modes of existence, but that he is now ready to affirm something. And so going back to those three stages, the metamorphoses of the spirit that Nietzsche was talking about, I think absolutely the narrator has made a step in the film towards that child stage. On the book, I think it is more debatable and there's more ambiguity there. one other interesting thing about the Nietzsche stages is Nietzsche's key idea is that in order to achieve an authentic existence, the key idea that he was talking about was overcoming oneself, becoming the overman, a man who has overcome the more shallower forms of existence. And that's where his parables of the three stages come from. I think that is dramatized quite directly in this novel through the way in which the narrator's primary obstacle by the end is not just to overthrow the camel stage of his existence, consumerism, his shallow jobs, so on and so forth, but also the Tyler Durden stage. He has to overcome that aspect of himself in order to become a more intimate and authentic human being. So, I'm curious to hear if you all have any more questions regarding Fight Club. I think there's a lot to unpack here, and you should especially, I hope you should appreciate the depth of this novel and the film, how many philosophical layers and how many ways of approaching it there are through a Marxist or unpackaging the Marxist aspects of this and the critique of consumerist capitalism, unpackaging the more Freudian aspects in terms of the narrator's relationship with his parents and the critique of civilization, getting to the Nietzschean stages of transforming oneself, so on and so forth. I think this novel is very deep, and it's one that is very rewarding to go back to and look at and reread again and again to see all these different clues that you pick up on. So hopefully you found this novel interesting, philosophically provocative, and I look forward to discussing our next work of literature.